My name is Natalia Ollus. I'm the director of HEUNI, which is the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, affiliated with the UN. I'm very, very pleased to welcome you all to this side event, which is organized by the Permanent Mission of Finland in Vienna, together with us, HEUNI, and with support from UNODC. We'll be discussing the route to a successful investigation of labor exploitation and trafficking for forced labor, and in particular, practical guidelines and recommendations for police and labor inspectors. This webinar is also the first in a series of anniversary webinars since HEUNI is turning 40 this year, so I'm very happy to launch the first of our events today. I think without much further ado, to be able to ensure sufficient time for questions and discussions, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker. Sorry, I forgot to go through our guidelines for the event, so please keep your microphones muted. We will also be able to mute you in case there's some problem at your end. And then please, if you have questions at the end, we will go through all the presentations first and then take questions at the end. You can put them in the chat function. And just a note for everybody, this session will be recorded. And please feel free to use our hashtags in social media, tagging HEUNI and also using these hashtags CCPCJ30, HEUNI40, FlowTHB and labor exploitation. All right, without much further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker, who is Anniina Jokinen, my colleague from HEUNI. Anniina is one of the foremost experts on labor exploitation and trafficking in Finland, and has been working on this issue for a very long time. And it's been my great privilege and honor to have researched this issue with her for the past 10 years. Anniina, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks so much, Natalia. So I will be talking about our recently ended project, Flow, where we looked at labor exploitation and trafficking issues and developed concrete tools for labor inspectors and the police based on good practice that we have from different countries. Alexandra, if you will go to the next slide. So the Flow project was an EU-funded project from the ISF Police Fund, and the countries involved with this project were Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Bulgaria. And last year, we also did a study trip to Belgium to understand better how they approach this issue through multidisciplinary cooperation. To set the scene for this presentation and for the project, we were focusing on the phenomenon of labor trafficking and exploitation, and we can see that more and more cases are being uncovered in Europe in certain risk sectors such as construction, restaurants, cleaning and agriculture. And everything may seem legal on paper, but then in reality, exploited migrant workers work very long hours in poor conditions and lack any real access to remedies. So this was the starting point for our project. And if you go to the next slide, based on case examples, we developed this tool called Shady Business to raise awareness on the business model of labor exploitation, a model of business making which utilizes methods that are legal, gray, and illegal, and combines those. And our attention in this report focus on different forms of exploitation that workers have encountered, as well as associated economic crimes. So based on the work that we did and gathering case examples from the 4 countries, we analyzed them and created this business model of labor exploitation and put it in a visual form, which you can see in this slide. So it's based on 2 strategies. The first one is a cost reduction strategy, which relies on reduction of labor cost through underpayment or through withholding wages entirely to victims, making the workers work longer hours, not providing them with legally required conditions for safe and healthy work environment, and evasion of taxes, social and health contributions. And then at the same time, these perpetrators also use a second way of profit making, which is the revenue generation strategy. And this is relies on imposition of upfront fees for the victims for securing a job in the first place, so recruitment fees, as well as an inflation of different costs for transportation, housing, food, clothes, and even work equipment and tools, and which then result in a profit that the exploiters use and take for granted. If we move on then to the next slide, our analysis shows that this issue is very much a structural issue, and labor exploitation is a low-risk, high-gain form of corporate crime, which is motivated by this profit-making structure. And the criminals use different legal structures to hide away their grey and illegal activities and illicit flows. And they use methods such as cascade subcontracting, posting of workers, bogus self-employment, and use of fronts, strawmen, and letterbox companies to hide away the exploitation from the eyes of the authorities, which makes it difficult for authorities to reveal and to counteract. And this complexity of these subcontracting chains facilitates exploitation at the lower levels of the chain. So based on these issues that we found, we developed an investigation tool. Alexandra, if you will go to the next slide, please. So we developed this investigation tool for labor law enforcement and labor inspectors, and it has different checklists for these actors. If we move on. So this investigation tool highlights the importance of having a victim-sensitive investigation and argues that successful investigation into these crimes requires a comprehensive approach, careful planning, and intelligence gathering, where the victim and approaching the victim is of key importance. If the offender has a chance to put pressure on the victim, they may be at a serious risk, and they are afraid to tell their stories to the authorities and to cooperate with the authorities. So this is very important, that the approach that the law enforcement takes in these cases must be victim-centered and victim-sensitive. And the information that is collected through the victim is of high importance when it comes to having a full picture of the totality of the situation and what is going on in these complex issues and investigations. Next, please. So we also highlight the importance of having a good financial investigation techniques used in the investigation of cases, because tracking financial transactions and assets of both the suspects and victims can reveal several things and can give good evidence of the exploitation scheme in place. So, for example, transfers or disposals by offenders to victims' accounts and further transfers to abroad or into other assets can be seen, as well as evidence of kickbacks where victims have to pay back their wages, or where there's no normal transaction in the victim's bank accounts whatsoever for living cost or other such details. And we also argue that it is of very important to immediately confiscate the proceeds of crime, and this is essential for the next steps of the investigation. And in the next slide, we now highlight the different steps that are needed in order to undertake a successful investigation. And this visualization outlines these different steps that must be taken. And this is not necessary that you take these in a chronological order, but they should be considered in order to make sure that the perpetrators are held accountable for their actions and that victims can claim their rights. And so there's everything from ensuring the safety of the victim and referring them to services, to collecting evidence and backing up the victim's statement with object and documentary evidence. You need time for the victim to be able to reveal their story and talk about their experiences. And throughout the investigation, it is of vital importance that the authorities cooperate with the other authorities as well as victim service providers, and that they also follow the money and use these financial investigation techniques and cooperate with the other countries if needed. And with a successful end result is, of course, that the perpetrators are convicted for human trafficking and that victims have access to justice and compensation. If we go to the next slide, please. So we also created a checklist for labor inspectors because they are in a unique position to identify these cases during inspections that they make, and we cooperated in this with Katja-Pia, who will be talking today, and highlighted different things that you can pay attention to. You can see them from the slide. And then we also, in the next slide, showcase some of the questions that authorities can ask from the victims, because it is important to ask specific questions that pertain to certain facts about the case, rather than it might be difficult for the victim to reply to a lot of open-ended questions where the victim doesn't really know about their labor rights in the destination country and how they have been violated, and they don't know about those details. So it's important to ask specific questions. Then if we go to the last slide, I just wanted to highlight that all of these tools, including separate set of tools that we've developed for the businesses as well, for their risk management measures, are available on our website at heuni.fi. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Anniina, very much for introducing our tools on prevention of labor exploitation. Without further ado, I want to give the floor to our next speaker, Katja-Pia Jenu, a senior inspector at the labor inspectorate in Finland, in Southern Finland. Katja-Pia is a close partner of us who has worked with us, or we have worked with Katja-Pia for many years. And Katja-Pia is also, I would say, one of the foremost labor inspectors in the Finnish context and has a lot of experience. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Yes, next one, please. I might be a bit biased myself since I am a labor inspector, but in my opinion, labor inspectors do play a very important role in detecting labor exploitation, because we are, at least in Finland, one of the few authorities who visit workplaces regularly, and we do that also unannounced. And we have got the right to talk to employees without the presence of the employer. So we actually, the labor inspectors might be the only representative of or any kind of government authority that the potential victim ever meets in Finland. And I also think that these labor inspections, they have also a preventative element, since during the inspections we not only talk with the employees, but we can also give information to the employers about the legal provisions concerning working hours and salaries in Finland, because sometimes it can be that the employer wants to follow the regulations but just doesn't know how to. Of course, we have those employers who willingly exploit employees, but I would like to think that there are some exceptions who maybe then change their ways once they have the right information. Next one, please. When we talk about labor exploitation, I think the salaries and working hours are in the center of the question, and therefore I think it's very important that the labor inspectors, they have a mandate in the legislation to monitor both salaries and working hours. In Finland, we have specialized inspectors for monitoring foreign labor because in Finland, foreign labor has been identified as a risk sector for labor exploitation. And also what's important is that labor inspectors in Finland, we have a clear mandate and also duty to refer any potential victims of THB to the National Assistance System. I feel very strongly that these mandates, they have to be in the legislation and it can't be left to an individual inspector's own interest. Next one, please. In detecting labor exploitation, I think multi-agency cooperation is very important because labor inspectors, we can't work alone. We can't solve the cases just by ourselves. We have joint inspections with other officials, of course, not even though, at least in Finland, most of our inspections are done just by ourselves. When we do the inspections, it's very important to try to get the employee side of the story, because in my opinion, in almost all labor exploitation cases, the problem has been the conflicting stories of the employee and the employer concerning the working hours. So it's important to get the employee side of the story. And what we are trying to do now in Finland is to use more and more interpreters during the inspections. In my opinion, again, I think it's fairly rare that somebody starts to tell their whole story during the inspection because, well, I think it's understandable. A strange person comes to you, somebody you've never met before, you might not feel comfortable in the situation, and therefore the victim might not be willing to pour out the whole exploitation story. And for this reason, we give out leaflets, different leaflets. We give out the contact details for our National Victims Assistance System and also the NGO Victim Support Finland contact details, and they are available in many different languages. What I find useful myself is also to give out the salary scales from collective agreements, because often, like Anniina already said, the employees, they are not aware what the salaries and working hours should be in Finland. So this is a way to get also information to them. And then having the contact details, they can always contact either me or the other organizations when they have a good moment for it themselves. The exchange of information is also very vital. We get a lot of information at the Labor Inspectorate about also anonymous tips about exploitation, and it's very important that the information doesn't just stop with us, but we refer it to, for example, the police. Next one, please. And then when we do find something during the inspections, or there is an employee who comes and talks to us about the real conditions at the workplace, then by law we are required to report the cases of work discrimination, and in Finland we've got this extortionate work discrimination as well, to the police. In Finland at the moment, trafficking is not a part of these crimes that we have to report, but even at the moment we include it in our reports, but this will be changed later this year or at the latest next year when the law is amended. And we also do some cooperation with the police during the investigation as well. So thank you. This is my presentation.
Thank you very much, Katja-Pia, for outlining the work of the Finnish Labour Inspectorate in preventing labour exploitation. I would like to give the floor next to our following speaker, to Marius Haugland from the Norwegian Police, from the Møre and Romsdal Police District. We have had the pleasure of working with Marius, who has been using HEUNI guidelines to develop a project to prevent labour exploitation specifically in the shipyard industry. So please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Hello, as said, my name is Marius Martinsen. I am the leader of a human trafficking group here in Møre and Romsdal Police District in Norway. For the past 2 years, we have been participating in an interagency project called Project Shipyard. This project has the goal to prevent labour exploitation in the shipyard industry. And the project is mainly based on crime preventive measures. If I could get the next slide, please. In our region, we have an interagency collaboration, which solely focuses on labour-oriented crime. This unit consists of the police, the Norwegian labour inspection authorities, the tax collectors, the Norwegian tax authorities, the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, and the Public Roads Administration. Most of these agencies have contributed to the project, but the police, labour inspection, and the tax authorities are the ones with the greatest responsibilities. So far, we have conducted 4 inspections at 4 different shipyards. These inspections were held in January and February of 2020. And we have inspected 41 different companies and interviewed 247 employees. If I could get next slide. The industry is a very large industry in our region. It employs approximately 15,000 workers. There is a great diversity in the industry, all from small companies to large international corporations. Several of the shipyards, they are main employers in small and rural districts. The communities depend on the shipyards for their own businesses, such as grocery stores and restaurants. There are also other factories and contractors that deliver services to the shipyards. So these are important for the small districts. Next slide, please. In 2019, the interagency collaboration received several anonymous tips that concerning the working conditions in the shipyard industry. We scoured our systems and found that we did not have much information about the actual working conditions, and we did not have many inspections previous. So because of this realization, we decided to conduct 2 inspections with the goal of gathering more information about the current situation and to make a report that would work as a foundation for an upcoming project. The intelligence report was delivered to management in the agency in the fall of 2019, and the project was started in 2020. The intelligence report was a significant document in planning the inspections in the main project. Through the 2 first inspections in 2020, we had realized that the shipyards are very large working places. Some of the shipyards had over 1,000 workers present at the time of inspection. This required a form of selection process to which companies we would inspect. If you can get the next slide. Thank you. We decided to make an indicator list that would be filled out before we visited the shipyards. The indicator list were based on guides from HEUNI. We used the guidelines for businesses and employers for risk management in subcontracting chains. And the indicators were spread evenly amongst the different agencies in the task force. And we needed a joint effort from all the agencies to assess the different companies. The indicator list was a good tool at the first inspections, but we realized that many of the companies that we met on site, they were not reported to the tax authorities. Since the list that we based our indications from were provided by the tax authorities, this meant that the companies that we met on site, they would not have been run through this indicator list in advance. And this also meant that it began to be very challenging at site when new and unknown companies appeared during our inspections. Because of this, we changed our indicator list and we decided to have a command and control center on site. The command and control center, they would arrive at the shipyard before the main task force and gather information about which companies were present at the time, and then follow the indicator list. The command and control center had members from all participating agencies, and they gave us a much better dialogue with the shipyard management, because the command and control center, they would provide information about the inspection and be available for the management at the shipyard throughout the day. After every inspection and the following casework, we would have a meeting with the shipyard management and inform them of our findings. This is a very crucial part of this project because it aims to give the industry more information about their own supply chains, also give them new tools on how to make better risk assessments in the future. In this process, we also use the guidelines. If I can get the next slide, please. I will now give you some data from our interviews. Here you can see that we have controlled 41 different companies and where they originate from. We met companies from almost all over the world. Apart from Norway, the 4 largest are Italy, Romania, Poland, and Lithuania. Next slide, please. On this slide, you will see the 247 workers and where they originated from. Again, we met people from almost all over the world. The reason for this very large portion of Polish workers are that we inspected some rather large Polish companies in one of the first inspections. And then next slide. In the interview, we focused on the working hours and how many days a week the workers worked. They were also asked about how much time they had for breaks every day. 90% of the workers stated that they worked 6 days a week and 54 hours. Most had 1 to 1.5 hour break time. Next slide. They were also asked about their wages and how much they earned per hour. In Norway, there is a Generalization Act that states how much different professions should earn as a minimum wage. For the shipyard industry, the Act states that they should have 162.6 Norwegian kroners per hour. This was based on the time of the interviews. This has increased a little bit latest year. Based on the interviews with the workers, 25% stated that they had less than 100 kroners an hour, and only 53% stated that they made minimum wage or above. Next slide, please. Following the inspections, the labor inspection authorities would issue a production order to the companies, and they would submit the workers' contracts and timesheets. Documents received from the companies will be compared to information gathered at the shipyard and at the interviews. At the shipyard, we gathered on-site registration lists. These would give us the information about when the worker was inside the shipyard. In the project, we discovered that workers reported more working hours than what the companies reported on the timesheets. This made it appear like the worker were getting minimum wage, but if you base the calculation on the on-site registration lists and the interviews, the workers' earnings were far below the minimum wage. Some of the companies delivered different documentation, all depending on what agency actually requested it. We wouldn't have discovered this unless we had a good agency collaboration. So in some cases, they are still ongoing, but there are several indicators that point towards wage theft by several of the companies. Next slide, please. In the project, we faced several challenges. To mention some, there are problems regarding the timesheets and on-site registration lists. These are essential in our calculation of the real working hours. Some of the shipyards could not produce historical data from their on-site registration. This makes the case difficult when only information we have available are documents produced by the company and the interview workers. Also, the shipyards, they are very large workplaces, as I said, almost 1,000 workers present. This required that we had very good indicator lists and that they were efficient and reliable. We needed to select the companies that poses the greatest threat. There are also problems concerning identification, and several companies were not registered by the tax authorities, which again meant that several of the workers most likely are not registered either. Also, the supply chains, they were often very extensive, and it's not always apparent which company the workers belongs to. Some of the workers were actually not sure what company they were working for. Some of the shipyards were not aware that they had certain companies working at their shipyard. In these cases, the companies had been brought in by subcontracting chains, and they were quite far down in the chain. Of course, COVID-19, it affected the project. We weren't able to have any inspections from March 2020 and until now. We hope that the situation now will improve and we will be able to finish our project in the spring of 2022. We seek to conduct 4 to 8 more inspections during this year, and this will provide us with an even larger data sample, and we will be able to look into different aspects of this possible and perhaps widespread wage theft in the industry. Next slide, please. So I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I added a little picture from Ålesund here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius, for your presentation. Very nice picture. Without further ado, I want to give the floor to Silke Albert from the Human Trafficking and Migrant Smuggling section at UNODC, who will provide a commentary on this session and on specifically the tool developed by HEUNI. Silke, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I would like to join everyone here in congratulating HEUNI on your latest tool, and happy birthday also. So it seems to me that a tool to uncover labor trafficking and provide guidance on investigations and checklists for labor inspectors comes very timely. That is at a time where we fear and have seen vulnerability to exploitation increase, where desperation rises and traffickers are all too ready to prey upon people and their dreams and hopes. The tool, in my opinion, has lots of added value. I mean, there are lots of tools out there already, and I don't exclude my own organization, but it seems that this one keeps it simple while pointing out the essence of things that need to be understood. Maybe next slide. You may have seen it already from Anniina's slides, that it's particularly reader-friendly, and it's based on practice. And I think it's so encouraging to see that it has been used in Norway and even further developed by the use. So it's always good when tools are based on practice and cases that is out there already. So things to consider and things that the tool puts into perspective is, for example, the nature of the crime. It's clandestine, and means can be means of control use can be openly violent, but also involve force, but can also be subtle and almost not recognizable to outsiders, but nonetheless be also heavy on the victims. And it's also key to know the sectors which might be prone to labor exploitation. And the tool provides a very good overview of this. And when we know the sectors, we can also recognize at-risk groups, both victims and offenders. And then we realize that trafficking in persons is a multidimensional issue. So that it's not just a crime issue and can thus not only be tackled by criminal justice. And it is also not only a labor-related issue. I mean, we do know this, of course, and we should know this by now. But I think the handbook makes it very, very concrete. And it also it shows the stakeholders from these different sectors, that is those that may be able to encounter and discover cases of exploitation, have to find ways to cooperate with each other. The tool lists not only labor inspectors and the police, but also health, fire, alcohol, tax inspectors, trade unions, social services, medical personnel, NGOs, victims, and so on and so on. And these provide channels of identification. And we should, of course, also not forget those, the insight and advice of those that have been exploited and trafficked, that is the survivors of these crimes. And the tool goes on to also suggest to create national networks of experts consisting of representatives of various authorities along with similar local networks. Next slide, please. And I think I can be reasonably short here, since Katja-Pia and Marius portrayed their work already. But when we look at the role of labor inspectors, they have, of course, great opportunities to come across cases of exploitation and trafficking, as they monitor conditions of work and the protection of workers, working hours, wages, safety, health and welfare, etc., and then are able to recognize irregularities, and also when there are patterns of irregularities, and they can share, as Katja-Pia mentioned, then their experiences with police and other authorities, and liaise with other competent authorities, which may lead to joint inspections, and again, not only with police, but for example, as has been pointed out in the handbook, also tax authorities. And then labor inspectors are the ones to build up the trust of the workers, not just at the point of first inception, but also long term. And to support the work of police, who may, at least in the early stages, not be trusted by victims of exploitation and trafficking. And the more labor inspectors study the indicators of trafficking in persons, the more they become skilled in identifying victims and cases. So now also to briefly look at the role of police, which has been already detailed through an amazing case by Marius from Norway. Next slide, please. So there are different police forces, and in an ideal case, of course, you have very specialized police forces who know kind of the ins and outs of trafficking in persons. But then there is also frontline police who come across trafficking in persons cases during their daily routine work. So it's very important that they are familiar with the indicators of trafficking in persons and look deeper. They are the ones to protect and preserve crime scenes, and they have to preserve evidence. So they actually have to know what they are looking for, and also even if they are not being trusted by let's say maybe migrants or undocumented workers or all sorts of workers who themselves fear that they have maybe violated law already, or that police is not looking at them in a positive way. Also, with these, police needs to establish trust. And for that, they need to also anticipate victim reactions and not expect self-identification, and not expect a free-floating account, and an account that is from the beginning to the end consistent and not contradictory, and not necessarily expect a very friendly behavior and a very open behavior from victims. And with this, of course, they are also the ones in the middle from the identification to also take care of victim referrals, so that victims do get the assistance and protection that they are entitled to. And again, we have also heard, and the handbook takes that up, the need for proactive investigation, so not to wait for victims complaining, which is of course difficult for them, and also the need for financial investigations. Next slide, please. Now, when having the handbook and reading through it, I was also thinking of like the need for us and maybe other organizations who take part in this panel now, in this webinar, of opportunities of how we can promote the tool jointly beyond this webinar, and channels for us. And one of the things that would be useful for UNODC, of course, is that we disseminate the tool during technical cooperation work. And maybe the tool is primarily focused on a European context. And however, I think that a lot of indicators and a lot of the control methods and a lot of the work areas, even though they may look differently, are quite similar. So and even we could at least have this as a skeleton and then build upon and tailor it to the needs of other countries. Then I understand that the tool is very much based on cases that have been identified and also tailored around these and the data gathered. And I think it would be great to continue that. So to continue looking at cases that have been identified with the use of these tools, to continue to increase our evidence and our knowledge and database, and to also enable other countries to learn from these. And then also, I think it would be great, again, starting from the webinar and starting from when this tool has been put together, to kind of like maintain this expert network and maybe broaden it, but at least maintain it and enable frequent exchanges, because I would think that HEUNI and all of us here are confronted with the same issue of looking at impact of our work, and also seeing, are we doing the right things? Are we using the right tools? Do we need to change? Are experts experiencing similar problems, etc.? And for this, I think networks are the best. And now that we even discovered new tools through the global pandemic, online tools, maybe there are means and ways to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Silke, for your reflections on the tool. I would now like to open up the floor for some comments and discussions. I please ask you to relay your questions or comments in the chat function, if there are any pressing questions or comments. Maybe meanwhile, I would like to ask the panelists perhaps to reflect on what would you, if you could make like one recommendation to governments for the prevention of labor exploitation, what would that be? Like, what would be the take-home message, the one take-home message from this panel? If Anniina perhaps starts. And if others have comments or questions, please paste them in the chat function. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Natalia. I think it's always a difficult question, like what is the one solution? But more and more I'm thinking about this issue is that I think political will is needed, and the issue must be really prioritized in all government action. And that prioritizing requires that there are sufficient tools for law enforcement and other actors to use, but also that they have sufficient resources to focus their monitoring efforts on the risk sectors and to do their work, so that there is impact in what they are doing, and that the perpetrators are held accountable for their actions, so that they cannot just continue with their exploitative business model and always recruit other workers to be exploited to replace those that have complained or have come out and left the situation. So those that are come to our mind immediately.
Thanks, Anniina. What about Katja-Pia? What's your view from the Labour Inspectorate side?
Actually, I agree with Anniina, and I would say that if I go into resources, if I concentrate on resources, I think it's important that often we only talk about one area. Like, for example, now in Finland, we have talked a lot about the resources of the labour inspectors or the resources of the police. But I think it's important to look at the whole picture, because it's not enough to give more resources to one of the to one in this long chain of officials. For example, if we have more resources at the Labour Inspectorate and we discover more cases or detect more labour exploitation, but the police doesn't have the resources to investigate the things, the cases, or then if the police have got more resources, but the prosecutors, there aren't enough prosecutors to prosecute cases, nothing really happens. There's always a bottleneck somewhere. So I think it's important to have more resources, but so that they are spread out to every level.
Thanks, Katja-Pia. Yeah, a comprehensive approach is clearly needed. Marius, what about you from the Norwegian police perspective? What would be your recommendation? Your mic is muted. Please turn it on. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with the previous recommendations, but I also think legislation and have legislational tools that not only work for the individual agency, but for the multi cooperation between the agencies, that the tools and the legislation must be made so that they can interact and work together. I also think we should focus some attention to the private market and include the market in this work. There's steady growing awareness of social sustainability in products, and use this awareness in the public more often than we do today.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for bringing also in the corporate side. This is something we have worked a lot with at HEUNI to try to raise awareness also among kind of corporate social responsibility actors. Please, Silke, what's your take on what's the one recommendation?
I just thinking about it, and of course I can echo all that has been said before. I think it's a bit similar to migrant smuggling. I think there needs to be a change in the mindset, because in migrant smuggling, for example, so much effort and focus is put on the wrongdoing of the migrant, which is the illegal border crossing. And then nobody looks at the bigger context, why that happens, and why that happens even to refugees who would actually then be given refugee status. So I think it's very often the focus of police, and present people are excluded, of course, but very often the focus of police and authorities is to kind of like prove the very wrongdoing of the person that they intercept. And then, of course, the people often fulfill this expectation and contradict themselves and are hostile. And so there needs to be a bit of a mindset to think, a change in the mindset to think of these people of really having been exploited. And there are others in the back with an intention to exploit and to make money from that. And I think this is what we need to get at. Among many other things. This is just the 2 cents that you asked for. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think everybody has raised the issue of a comprehensive approach, but also then of kind of raising awareness of the phenomenon and its existence. And there I kind of feel that perhaps our tools could be useful there as well. This tool that has been discussed today, the tool for a successful investigation, includes also kind of an overview of what is labor exploitation, what does it look like, and even though it's developed for only certain countries, I think it's quite general. Some of the points that they also suit also other country contexts. I'm afraid we are running out of time. These side events are very, very short. I want to thank all the presenters and all the audience, the listeners. I think this was very, very interesting. As just a final follow-up point, I want to mention that we at HEUNI are starting a new project called ELECT, where we will dig even deeper into the issue of how to successfully investigate labor exploitation and how to kind of cooperate among criminal justice practitioners, labor inspectors, tax authorities, and other relevant partners, and how to make that more efficient than it is today. So I'm hoping that in a few years we'll be able to present the findings of that project here. Anniina wants me to mention the countries as well. So it's in addition to Finland, it's Estonia and Latvia. And again, it's a region, specific geographic region, but we are also kind of hoping to be able to develop something that is useful also for a wider geographic audience. If there's nothing else, yes, Anniina, please.
And just that we will be going also to Ukraine and Poland to learn a bit more about the posting of Ukrainian workers via those countries further on into Europe, which I think a lot of countries are nowadays seeing. So hopefully we can share some light also on that phenomenon.
Yes, thank you, Anniina. It's one of the kind of the new forms of exploitation that we're interested in looking at, or the roots of exploitation from Ukraine via Poland to other EU countries. There's some comment in the chat that the finishing time of the event is 1:20. I'm sorry, the finishing time is sharp. It starts at 10 past and finishes at sharp, depending on your time zone, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 3 o'clock. So I'm afraid we have to finish very soon. So I want to thank you all. If you're interested in following up on any of the presentations or listening to the presentations again, we will post parts of this recording on our YouTube channel in some days or weeks. And you can also be in touch with us at HEUNI to make sure that you get the publications or further information from us. Thank you very much. There's a comment also from Latin America. I think the phenomenon is very similar and the approaches are also very similar. The country contexts of course differ, but I think it's a question of trying to, first of all, identify the question and then address it through police inspections and also victim support, which we didn't talk so much about today. But I want to thank you all for attending this event and looking forward to hearing from you in the future. And here's the HEUNI email address, heuni@om.fi, if you want to contact us. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.